Hi, this is Pastor Phil. Welcome to Kids Worship. And today we're going to begin with an affirmation. You know what an affirmation is? That's something that's true. And so the affirmation today is God is everywhere within me and around me. So can you repeat after me? Let's see, what can we do for God? Let's do this. God is everywhere. God is everywhere within me, and around me, Let's try it again. God is everywhere within me and around me. God is everywhere within me and around me. And so I've got a song here. It's called Psalm 25, and it's written by a woman named Krista Wieger back in 1965. And I'm changing the words a little bit, but the title is the same. I mean, the music is the same. And so I'm going to sing it for you, and then I'm going to show you some of the motions. Okay. You, oh God, are everywhere within me and around me. You, oh God, are everywhere within me and around me. So let's add some motions to that. You, oh God, are everywhere within me and around me. You, oh God, are everywhere within me and around me. So that's the chorus, and then the next part is there's motions. Higher than the mountains, then you make a valley with your arms. Deeper than the seas, wider than the ocean is your love for me. Let's try that again. Higher than the mountains, deeper than the sea, wider than the ocean is your love for me. You're with me on the mountains and the valley below. You are right here inside me everywhere that I go. So let's just try that. Higher than the mountains, deeper than the seas, wider than the ocean is your love for me. You're with me on the mountains and the valleys below. You are right here inside me everywhere that I go. Here we go back to the first part. You, oh God, are everywhere within me and around me. You, oh God, are everywhere within me and around me. Higher than the mountains, deeper than the seas, wider than the ocean is your love for me. You're with me on the mountains and the valleys below. You are right here inside me everywhere that I go. You, oh Lord, are everywhere within me and around me. You, oh God, are everywhere within me and around me. Remember the affirmation. God is everywhere within me and around me.
Hi, everyone. It's Pastor Laura. I haven't seen you in such a long time, so it's so good to be with you this morning. Today, we're learning a lesson. Actually, we're learning about who God is and how God is in the world. And so Pastor Phil shared with you the affirmation for today that says, God is everywhere within me and around me. God is everywhere within me and around me. As we start the lesson today, first we're going to have a little puppet show about Jesus talking about his kingdom. So we're going to learn a little bit about God by learning something about Jesus's kingdom. So here we go. Watch the puppet show. Jesus was telling people about his kingdom. He was saying he was the king of the whole world. Some people were excited and some people didn't understand. They were confused and frustrated, and some people were mad. They thought he was threatening the emperor. So they took him to see Pilate. And Jesus started to tell Pilate the same things he was telling the people. He was saying that he was a king and he was a ruler. But Pilate didn't understand. And so Jesus began to explain about his kingdom. He said, "My kingdom is not a particular place. My kingdom comes whenever people are helping one another heal. My kingdom comes whenever people celebrate the birth of new babies. It comes whenever people are loving one another. And when people are sharing what they have, when they're sharing their food, and when they're sharing their money, and when they're sharing their work and helping each other. In fact, my kingdom comes whenever people are living together and they're celebrating life itself. And when that happens, my kingdom is present. It's everywhere." Pilate didn't understand, and so he said to Jesus, "Well, do you have a crown? Do you have a throne? Tell me who your subjects are." Jesus had been talking a lot about his kingdom when Pilate said those things. He was very sad and frustrated because Pilate didn't understand. You can find the story in the Bible. It's in the Gospel of John in the 18th chapter. And this is a story about God's people, and it's for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Jesus had a great way of talking about his kingdom, didn't he? He said, "My kingdom isn't any one place. It's present whenever people are sharing what they have, whenever people are loving one another, whenever people are helping one another. Then my kingdom is present and you're in my kingdom." Jesus was saying, my kingdom can be and is everywhere, just like I am. So God's saying, my kingdom is everywhere, just like I am everywhere. So we want to talk a little bit about how God is everywhere. And I have some pictures to kind of tell us about how God is everywhere. So let's take a look at that. This is a picture of our universe. I think there's a thing here. I don't know if I can get this thing out of the way. Yeah, maybe I can. So this is a picture of the Andromeda solar system, and it's one of the solar systems in our universe. And I want you to take just a minute and see if you can count how many stars are in this picture. Well, after you start counting, you could see that it might take a long time to count and you might miss some. So I think there's millions and millions and millions of stars. What do you say? Is that what you think too? That's what I think. I think there's millions and millions of stars. And so if we wanted to use the color red to show God's presence with these stars, how do you think we might do that? Do you think we might, oh, maybe it's not going to work here. Let's see. We might, oh, here we go. So maybe we would put God's presence, would God's presence just be in this part of the solar system? Would God be just with those stars, do you think? Or maybe God just with these stars? Or maybe God is here sometimes and here other times? What do you think? Or maybe God's presence isn't that big. Maybe it's just small like this. Well, maybe if we wanted to show God how God is present with the stars, we might have to show it like that God is with the stars everywhere all the time. That's kind of what I think, is that God is everywhere all the time. Okay, well, let's talk then about how God is with people. So this is a picture of one person from every country in the world. And so each person is holding up a flag that represents their country. And so each one of those people really represents a lot of people. And all together, they represent all the people in our whole world. So if we wanted to show how God is with people in the world, would we show God like this? Like maybe God is only with one person at a time. What do you think? Or maybe God is, after God's done being with that person, that God is with these people all at the same time. What do you think? Or maybe over here. But I think if we were going to show how God is really with people, we would have to show something like this, that God is everywhere all the time with all people. Now we have a lot of trouble seeing God. We have to, because we don't see red like that when we see God. We have to practice seeing God in the world and seeing God with people. And so we have a special place. You might recognize this place. If you've never been to Church of the Cross, this is the altar at Church of the Cross. And if you go to Church of the Cross, you recognize this place right away. It's right in the front of the church. And this place is a special place where we practice seeing God and we practice reminding ourselves that God is everywhere. So for us, this could be like that red that's everywhere, but in this particular place, this is where we practice seeing God everywhere. And we call this the altar. So we have special things on the altar that remind us of God. So actually the green reminds us that God is giving growth and God is in all living things. And the cross reminds us of Jesus, of course. And that white cloth, it reminds us of God's goodness, that God is clean and pure and good all the time. And the candles remind us that God is alive. So when we light those and we have fire, it's a symbol of the Holy Spirit being with us. Okay, we have a couple of activities today. And the first one is something for you to do at home. You know, we aren't always at church and we don't see that altar all the time. You know, usually we just see it Sunday morning, but sometimes we don't go to church. We're not at church. We haven't been to church actually for many, many months. And so if you haven't seen that altar, then you haven't been to church to have the altar remind you that God is everywhere. And so what we're going to do is the first activity is build our own altar. So I'm here in my office and I cleaned off my desk so that I could build an altar. So my desk is behind me, pretty cleaned off, still has some stuff on there. But I'm going to take some stuff and put it on my desk and build my own altar that reminds me of God. So the first thing I have is I have a big plant in my office and I'm going to move that to my altar because living things remind me of God. So I have a big plant. And because living things remind me of God, I have some other things. I happen to have some plastic animals in my office. I have a tiger. He's pretty little. These are pretty little animals. And I have a giraffe. And I have this one. I'll hold it close. This one's a moose. I have a moose. And I have this one is it's a leopard. So I'm going to put these animals here to remind me that God is in all living things. Wow, this one you can't even hardly see, this moose. I'm going to maybe move him so you can see him better. Here, there's a moose. I also have some other things from nature. I have a really special feather. This is from a pheasant, and they live really near where I live in the bushes there. And so sometimes we find feathers like this. They're really fancy ones. I'm going to put that feather also on my altar. And I also have some pretty big seashells. These come from the ocean. And the ocean reminds me a lot about God because it's really, really big. And when you're at the ocean, it seems like it's everywhere. So God's kind of like that. So I'm going to put these shells here on my altar too. Now, when you're making your altar, you can choose anything that reminds you of God. In fact, you could go for a walk and pick some things that remind you about God, or you can use some things from your bedroom, or maybe you have some things from other Sunday school classes that remind you of God. Speaking of that, I happen to have a really special cross, and that of course reminds me of Jesus, so I'm going to put that on my altar too. And lastly, on my altar, I'm going to put a candle just like we have on our altar at church, and I'm going to light that baby up. Right. So your first activity is to build a little altar at home. And you can build it in your room, or you could build it in the center of your dining room table, maybe where you have your meals, and you could light your candle when you say grace before your meals. It doesn't have to be an activity that you do by yourself. You can build an altar. You can have everyone in your family help and build and set aside a place in your house that reminds you that God is everywhere. And remember the affirmation for today. God is everywhere, within me and around me. Okay, I'm going to come back in the frame, but the altar is now going to be behind me. Maybe I can sit so you can see part of it as we're talking. Yeah, here you can see it. Maybe I'll move this candle a little bit so you can see it. Perfect. Okay. So first activity, build an altar. Okay. So the next thing that we want to do is we're going to have a lesson, and the lesson is a story. So I'm going to read a story to you called The Elephant. So I'm going to go back to my pictures. So we're going to see the altar in a minute, and then some pictures for this story will come right after that. But we'll see that in just a second. So long ago, at the foot of the tall Himalayan mountains, there was a very small school. The school was unusual because all the students were blind. It means they couldn't see. Chinook was their wise and their gentle teacher. And one day Chinook received a letter, and he read this letter aloud to the class. Dear cousin, I will be traveling past your village in a few weeks' time, and I would like very much to visit your school. Tell your students I will be traveling by elephant. Your loving cousin. What's an elephant like? All the students asked excitedly. They had lived all their lives in the mountains, and they didn't know about any of the animals that lived in the plains. You will find out, was all Chinook would say. On the day Chinook's cousin arrived on his elephant, the class was too excited to study, and Chinook announced, today, the elephant will be our teacher. So the children gathered around the elephant, and now I have some pictures here. I'm going to first see the altar again, and then here's the first picture. Can I see it? Yeah, so I put blindfolds on the students because they're blind. So the children gathered all around the elephant, and Chinook led one to the long trunk and one to the bristly tail, and he took two students to the side of the elephant, and they all stretched up to feel the rough skin, and then he helped two of the students feel the elephant's legs, and he took a student to feel the tusk of the elephant, and finally to feel the elephant's flapping ears. And all the children carefully explored the one part of the elephant that was theirs to explore, and they were exclaiming in wonder and delight, of course. I don't know if you've ever touched an elephant, but that would be exciting, I think. Later, they all sat under a tree, and they talked about what they had discovered about the elephant. So Chinook said, tell me what the elephant is like. And the student that had touched the tusk said, the elephant is like a very sharp spear. The student that had touched the trunk said, no, the elephant is like a big long snake. You're wrong. It's like a big long snake. Well, the student that had touched the tail said, you're both wrong. An elephant is like a tough, bristly rope. Well, the students that had touched the side of the elephant and felt that rough skin said, no, the elephant is like a tall, rough wall that breathes. That isn't true, said the ones who touched the legs. The elephant is like a strong, sturdy tree. You're all wrong, said the last student who had touched the elephant's ear. And that student said, the elephant is like a large flapping fan that stirs the hot air. Chinook's cousin started laughing as each student was saying that they were right about what the elephant was like, and they were wrong about what everyone else was saying was wrong. And so Chinook let them argue until all the children got tired of hearing their own voices. Finally, the children were quiet, and they turned back toward their teacher, and Chinook said to them with a smile, you're all right, and you're all wrong. Let's go back to our teacher, the elephant. And one by one, Chinook and his cousin led each of the students around the entire elephant. You can go back up to this other picture so you can see. led them all around the entire elephant. They got to touch every part of the elephant. They all touched the snake-like trunk and the spear-like tusks, the rope-like tail, the wall-like sides, and those tree-like legs, and those ears that are like a big fan. And then they all started to talk about what they learned, and the littlest student said, "I think we learned a lot from our teacher, the elephant, today. All of our experiences were true, but none of us knew the whole truth." That's right. Here's a great picture of an elephant, right? So we have this lesson, why do you think? Have you ever touched an elephant? Have you ever touched every part of an elephant? I haven't. But I've also never touched God, and I have never touched every part of God. I know some things about God, but I certainly don't know everything about God. I just don't know. So that lesson is meant to teach us that God is kind of like that elephant, that God is everywhere, and there are lots of things to know about God, and probably none of us will know everything about God. But remember what we learned? God is everywhere. God is within me and around me. Let's pray together. Maybe we'll do a repeat prayer. So I'll say something and you can repeat it after I say it. Dear God, thank you for being everywhere. And thank you for being everywhere all the time. Help us to learn about you. Help us to love you. And help us to build little altars that remind us of you. Amen. So you saw in my pictures that I was sharing that there's a picture of an elephant. Here it is again. So it turns out that this picture of the elephant is also added to this lesson. So you can download this picture of the elephant to your own computer if you can, and print it out if you can. And the last activity, or the second activity for today, is to take that picture of the elephant and cut it into pieces. Cut it into maybe 6 or 8 pieces. You could cut it into more if you want, but it's harder to put back together the more pieces you have. So you want to cut it up and turn it into a little puzzle. Take that elephant apart and put it back together. And let this little activity remind you how the elephant is like God. We can see one part of the puzzle, but it's really hard to put the whole thing together and to see that God is everywhere, within me and around me. Okay, I think Pastor Phil is going to sing one more time, and we're going to call it a day. Have a good day and go out in the world looking for God everywhere.
For our closing song, let's sing the song that we learned at the beginning, Psalm 25, with the words, God, you, O God, are everywhere within me and around me. Here we go. Whoops. You, O God, are everywhere within me and around me. You, O God, are everywhere within me and around me. Higher than the mountains, deeper than the sea, wider than the ocean is your love for me. With me on the mountains and the valleys below, you are right here inside me everywhere that I go. You, oh God, are everywhere within me and around me. You, oh God, are everywhere within me and around me. Higher than the mountains, deeper than the sea, wider than the ocean is your love for me. You're with me on the mountains and the valleys below. You are right here inside me everywhere that I go. See you next week.